This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
Is painting a non-Games Workshop box set harder or more complicated than a standard Games Workshop box set? I mean, painting any kind of box set can be quite daunting, especially if it's this one where you've got two opposing forces and a whole host of scenery to go with it. Now, the great thing about workshop stuff is you've got lots of lore that you can follow. There's the website with lots of 360s you can check, but it's also all made up so you can actually do whatever you want with those colour schemes, where some of the bit more like Star Wars has a lot more lore to it, a lot more canon, and chances are if you're going to spend money on this, you're probably going to want to tie in the colour schemes to the TV shows. Now, as a historical painter, I do that. I tend to research stuff, get in all the books and make sure I'm doing this regiment or this battle or whatever, and Star Wars I don't think is any different to that. So I guess all I need to do now is get my research hat on, watch some TV shows, what a chore, but the bigger question is, can I paint this lot in less than a day? Now, after everything's built, the first thing I'm going to do is start off with the Republic forces, then I'm going to move on to the Separatist forces, and then I'm going to do the scenery, and then base everything at the end. Now, I'm going to start off first with Rex and the 501st clones, and the first thing I'm going to do is have these undercoated with white spray. Any white would do, it's not really a problem, just make sure it's a nice white. Now I'm going to pick out all the black details with Black Legion, including the blaster. Now don't worry about splodges, we can kind of sort that out in a mo. It's just a lot easier to get those black sections painted now because you can tidy it with some white before you do any other elements. And if you do get any black on the white, now's the time to tidy up with a white paint. Next, I'm going to add some definition to the white, and for this I'm going to be using some thinned down Soulblight grey. So that's 50-50 wash and water, or medium if you've got it. And what this is going to do is going to add a bit more definition to that armour, and don't worry, if you get on the black, once it's dry, you're not actually going to see it, so you don't have to keep tidying back up with black. To help add some extra punch to those edges, I'm just going to do a light dry brush of white. Then it's time to pick out any weapons with gunmetal. It might seem bright to start off with, but we're going to solve that in a moment or two. Now, to knock those guns back a bit, I'm going to get some thinned down Black Legion and apply that over the weaponry. You could use Norn oil if you have that as well, but thinning down Black Legion works just as well. And there we are. You could just leave your clones at this point and maybe add some chipping to them, which we'll show you in a moment or two. If you're not confident about doing any markings, this is perfect. Your clones look fine. They look like clones, so don't worry about turning them into a particular regiment. Then to make your actual clones and Rex look like the 501st, we're going to apply some Stormfiend to the armour as well as the shoulder pads and the pauldron. Now you've got some markings down like Rex's arms and a little bit on his legs. Again, if you're making any mistakes here, don't worry, you can tie it with some white. In a moment or two, I'm going to do some sponging, which can actually solve a lot of those problems if you do make any mistakes. But just take your time and have the paint slightly thinned down as well, because you can always add a second coat if you need to. Then next up is to lightly sponge on some white for chipping on the markings. Now I'm just going to do this quite gently across those armour bits. I'm not going to do it on the pauldron because it won't need it, but just around his legs. And if you're, again, getting to some areas that are hard to reach, just get a brush and just do like the odd little scuff and a little nick here and there. And then to finish off, to make him look a bit more battle damage, I'm going to get some ash grey and lightly sponge that on too. Now if you chose not to do any markings on your clone troopers, apply this now. If you want to make them look a bit more battle worn, and again, if there's any hard to reach areas, just get a brush and just do a couple of little flicks and nicks in there as well. There we are, our 501st clones and Rex are done.
I'm not used to being sidelined. There are other miniature games people want to paint. What a strange feeling. In trying times like these, I like to fall back on fond memories of my good friend Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything from products to content to time. All in one place, all on your terms. Fluid Engine is a next generation website design system from Squarespace. It's never been easier for anyone to unlock unbreakable creativity. Start with a best-in-class website template and customize every design detail with a reimagined drag and drop technology for desktop or mobile. Squarespace allows you to sell products on an online store, whether it's physical, digital, or service products. Squarespace has the tools you need to start selling online. You can easily sell custom merch and create a passive income stream that engages your audience and scales with your brand. Simply design your products, and production, inventory, and shipping are all handled by us, saving you time, money, and effort. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going back to the gym because my cousin's turned up and it's obvious I've been skipping leg day. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/thepaintingphase to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Next up is Boca Tan and her Death Watch, or Night Owls, whichever you prefer. So we're going to start first with an Undercoat in Mechanica Standard Grey. That will just give us a nice tone for all that underclothing. Then I'm just going to lightly dry brush with Sky Grey all over, and I'm going to apply it a little bit heavier to where the smoke is, and I just want to build it up a couple of times, and that's going to just solve our smoke effect without much effort. Then I'm going to pick out any silver details, such as the armour and the West Star blasters with gunmetal. Any leather details, such as the belt and light straps, and apply some tan earth to those. Then I'm going to pick out all the blue details, so pretty much all the armour, and I'll be using Storm Fiend for this. Now, it's quite a nice runny paint, and this is going to kind of base coat ready for when we layer up later on. Then I'm going to apply some white to Bo's face, which has got like a semicircle kind of design. Again, don't worry if you're getting the little eye slits, because we can tidy that back up with black in a bit anyway. And you might want to do a couple of coats of white here. Now what I'm going to do is get a little bit of thinned down Storm Fiend. I'm just going to drop that into the helmet design. The great thing about Bo is the actual design is sculpted in. So what I'm going to do is drop it in and then wipe away with my finger. And if you need to, probably on one or two little areas, you can just tidy it with a bit of white, but actually just thinning down that blue is going to save you so much effort. Pick out any black details with Black Legion. So again, you can just sort out a face mask. And then I'm going to apply Norn Oil or Thin Down Black Legion, whichever you prefer, over the metals, the cloth, and the leather. With that washed dry, I'm now just going to layer back up that blue armour with medium blue. This is just to add more punch to the armour. It's not really highlighting, it's just layering those raised areas. Then I'm going to lightly dry brush some white on the flame effects, and also paint this on the chest armour where they've got those little flicky lights. Then to get the model up to a tabletop level, I'm just going to apply a little bit of Imperial Fist to the flame and the lights on the armour, and then you can leave them at this and start playing games with them. Now, to add some extra love to your Mandalorians, I'm just going to tidy up a few details and add a few highlights. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is get some gunmetal and just tidy up those silver details, especially on the armour, just a little bit. Don't go all the way over, I'm just going around the raised parts. Then I'm going to get some Ducat blue and then just highlight the blue armour. And then I'm going to add a few little nicks and flicks in there so it looks like battle damage. And there we are. With that little bit of extra love, our Mandalorians are pretty much done. All they need to do now is be based. So after watching all of the Clone Wars TV shows, the Rebels, and all the movies, I've got a good grasp of what the armour looks like and what the characters look like, but getting that reference can be quite hard sometimes. There's plenty of resource out there looking on like search engines and stuff, but one of the things I found most valuable is I like collecting some of the 6-scale figures, and they have such a resource because you can get they're bob on with their designs and the colour schemes. So Hot Toys are very, very adamant that these are the correct colours and these are the correct designs. So I've just been looking at those as reference. There's a few like YouTubers out there that do stuff. Justin Collector was pretty good, and he does 360s. So for all the characters, what I was doing was watching some of these YouTube videos, pausing when they're on the back, on the sides, on the front, just to get a bit more of an idea of how the actual uniforms looked in comparison to the real ones from the TV show, if you like. So a good source of reference, and really helped me in the process of doing this video, because there's not a lot of Osprey books out there for Star Wars figures. So I'm starting to soak it off with a grey undercoat, and again, like the previous Mandalorians, I'm just going to lightly dry brush Sky Grey over. Again, this is going to add like as a pre-highlight, ready for when I start applying other colours over. So for all the blue clothing, so that's our actual robes and the trousers, I'm going to apply some Storm Fiend over that. Again, some of those bits of Sky Grey will show through as a highlight. Then I'm going to pick out any silver sections with gunmetal. Using those 1/6 scale videos on YouTube really helped at this point, because I wasn't entirely sure what bits were silver, what bits weren't. Even looking at the box packaging, you know, sometimes there's a bit of room for interpretation, but I valued that resource so much at this point. For any black or leather details, I'm going to use some Black Legion. Then I'm going to coat over all of those with Nuln Oil. Once dry, I'm going to pick out Ahsoka skin using light rust. It's almost perfect for Ahsoka skin. You just need to do a couple of thin coats of it just to build up that nice orangey skin tone. And apply any white to the lightsaber as well as Ahsoka's Leku as well. If you don't know what Leku is, that's the weird sort of bits coming down from her head. Her hair. Tendrils, whatever. Now I'm going to shade over with Targor Raid Shade just for a bit of depth. Next up is to apply Thin Down Stormfiend to the Leku designs. Now I started off quite thin because it will run into those cracks because it is actually all sculpted in, and then you just do a second coat after once you've got like the border sorted out. And if you made any mistakes, get some white and tidy back up those as well. And then to get a tabletop ready, I'm just going to get some Frost Art and apply that over the blade. And you can pretty much start playing games with Ahsoka at this point. Now to get to the next level, we're just going to add some highlights. And again, I'm just going to tidy up the skin, as I always like to do at this point, and I'm just going to use light rust again. So that's like almost like a layer stroke highlight. Then as an extra highlight, I'm going to get some cork and just pick out those extremities like the nose, the cheeks. Then highlight any black with ash grey. I'm going to use medium blue again here. I'm just going to pick out those highlights on the robes. Then I'm going to apply a thin line of white to the blade using the edge of the brush. Also, if you're feeling more confident, apply some white to Ahsoka's face markings as well. Again, if you're not so sure, don't have to do it, or you can just get some thin down white and just drop it into those little details. Then just to finish off that lightsaber, I'm just going to heavily thin down some Frost Art and then just apply that over. What that will do is just knock the white back a little bit, put it back into the blue spectrum. Now for Anakin Skywalker, again, I'm starting this guy off in grey, and then I'm going to lightly dry brush sky grey over the top of that again. That's just get those highlights out in the early stages. Then I'm going to get some Cygor brown here, because he's wearing a lot of brown leather, and I'm going to base coat that all over pretty much the model. Then I'm going to pick out his trousers with tan earth. Then I'm going to apply some slightly thinned down Black Legion to his tunic or the main robe, and also his gloves. Then it's a matter of picking out any metal details with gunmetal. Then I'm going to coat Nuln Oil, or again, thin down Black Legion, whichever you prefer, all over. Now I'm going to get some skin painted on this guy. For this, I'm going to be using cork. And again, a couple of thin coats will help build that up. And just in the recesses, drop some Targor Raid Shade in there as well. And all I'm going to do now is get his lightsaber picked out with white, and again, coat over that with some Frost Art after, and this guy's pretty much ready to play games with. However, if you want to add some extra steps, stay tuned, because what we're going to do now is start highlighting and layering those details up. So first of all, I'm going to layer up the trousers with some tan earth, and also use that same colour to highlight the dark brown shirt and some little bits on his boots as well. Then I'm going to thin down Cygor brown and use as a glaze for his shirt and robe. All it's going to do is just knock back those highlights. Now, when doing a glaze, what you're intended to do is, it's the consistency of milk, so you're thinning it down, kind of like a contrast, but you're not just pooling all over and hoping it goes in the cracks. You're kind of neatly layering it over everything. So what it does is it slightly darkens down the recesses a bit more, but also just knocks back those highlights, and it gives you a bit more of a nice general transition. So if your highlights are too high, then it will knock them back. If your shades are too dark, it will bring them a little bit lighter as well. Then I'm going to highlight up any black details with ash grey. Tie up his skin, especially the raised areas, with some cork, and then pick out those extreme highlights using a little bit of radiant flesh. Now I'm going to thin down a little bit more cork here, because I think some of those highlights are a bit too much. Again, as I was explaining previously with the glazes, I'm just going to apply a neat glaze of cork across his face, just to help knock back some of those highlights and also bring in some of those shades a bit lighter as well. And like Ahsoka, what we're going to do now is paint Anakin's lightsaber exactly the same way, so just follow that on how to do blue lightsabers. So all our Republic Force is now done. I'm really pleased with them. At first, you know, when you're at tabletop ready kind of levels, they're a bit like, all right, but once you get those highlights on, a little bit more love, because they deserve a little bit more love. But the purpose of doing this video to have two different levels is you can play some games with them, and then you can add some love later. I'm really pleased with the results. So what I'm going to now do is move on to the Separatists and get them up to the same point as well. So first up is going to be the Droids and the Droid Commander. Now, started with Xandria Dust on all the battle droids, and I did the Commander in grey. You'll also notice all the battle droids are based separately as well. It just makes it a lot easier to paint them as opposed to three being on one base. Before we begin doing any shades or dry brushing, I'm just going to get the Commander base coated with some dark green grey. So he's at kind of the same point really that I wanted to be, that the battle droids are at. And next up is to apply Targor Raid Shade over everything on the models. That includes the Commander, because then they're all shaded and ready for some dry brushing. This will also act as a nice subtle weathering effect as well. Now for the droids and the commander, I'm going to get some light earth and I'm just going to gently dry brush this all over. This is going to add definition to the armour. It's going to give it a bit of a roughness as well, so it looks like it's got more of a war-torn kind of appearance to it. Then we're going to get some gunmetal and apply that to like the blasters, as well as any joints that they've got, the aerials, hip joints. Again, check any references you've got as to what those might be. Now using Nornor, straight from the pot, I'm going to apply this to the blaster and any other metallic details. For the blaster, you might want to do a second coat after you've done the first, just to make it look a little bit darker, because they are quite almost black metallics like Uruk-hai armour. Now next up, we're going to get some dirty red. I'm going to apply this to those battle droids to make them security droids. Now you don't have to do this, you can just leave them as standard battle droids, but I just thought that red looks quite nice, and I can see why the box set's been done like that, because you've kind of got a blue versus red vibe going between the two forces, which actually works really nicely. So just take your time, look at the reference, a couple of thin down coats and you should be fine. And a little bit of Nornor just going to be applied over that red just to darken it down a bit, and then we're going to get some ash grey and then sponge that on for a bit more battle damage. So all that chipping done, these models are now pretty much done. They're finished. All that needs doing is basing. I'm not going to do any extra steps because they've kind of had that all done to them. So these are ready to play with. Next up is Gar Saxon and the Super Commandos. Again, starting from a grey undercoat, any grey would do. I like to use Mechanica Standard Grey, like the tone of it. Then I'm going to lightly dry brush Sky Grey over, like I've done with most of the models in this set. Then I'm going to get some thinned down Black Legion and apply that over the cloth. So this is going to go over the whole model. Once that's dry, I'm going to do a second coat, or a more neater coat, on the armour, and this will just break those two sections up as different materials. So you've got like a solid black for the armour, very dark grey for the clothing. Then any silver details, I'm going to get some gunmetal and pick those out. Most of the West Star blasters. Then it's a use of dirty red for the red armour areas. Again, a couple of coats of this. Once that's dry, get some Nornor, coat all over. Mainly for the metals, the armour and the cloth. Then I'm going to lightly dry brush some white onto those flame effects and also Gar Saxon's shield as well. This is a light dry brush, so just take your time, build it up. Also, if you've got any chest armour lights and Gar Saxon's visor, you might want to pick those out in white as well. A couple of coats. Then I'm going to apply some Imperial Fist to the flame, the lights, and Gar Saxon's visor. He looks really nice with a yellow visor. I really like it. Then I'm going to finish off with some Frost Art onto Gar Saxon's shield as well, to give it that kind of like glowing energy shield vibe. And these models are now ready at a point to be used on the tabletop to play some games with. However, if you want to take them to the next level, then stay tuned. First up, I'm going to highlight up the armour with some Ash Grey. Again, take your time, do some little nicks and flicks in there for a bit of battle damage. Then I'm going to highlight that really dark grey, if you like, cloth with some Sky Grey as well. And for the red armour, I'm going to tidy that back up with dirty red. Again, adding some nicks and flicks here and there. Then just do a little edge highlight here and there of some light rust. And don't forget to do this on the jetpacks as well. And there we are, Gar Saxon and his Super Commandos are done. Next up is Maul. Now this model is pretty much black, but he's got some nice red accents in there as well. So first of all, we're going to start with a grey undercoat. And as before, we're going to lightly dry brush some Sky Grey all over. And apply some thin down Black Legion over the cloth, and then a second coat for his tunic, because he's got a slightly darker tunic than he has to like his sleeves and his legs. And in metal areas or silver areas, I'm going to pick those out with gunmetal. And for the red areas, what I'm now going to do is get some dirty red and base coat the lightsaber and also his skin. Now I'm going to do it a bit more thinned on his skin so it'll run into those cracks, because these models, again, have all those markings sculpted in, and I'll wipe my finger across it so some of that black will show through. Just take your time, you can always tidy it back up with a little bit of black if you need to. And then I'm going to apply some Nornor over the metals, the armour and the cloth. Try and avoid the skin if you can, because it might go into that red and make it a bit darker and just undo everything you've just done. And Darth Maul is ready to be put on the tabletop to play some games with. Now we're going to move on to some extra steps for Maul, because he deserves them. I'm going to start first by highlighting that black tunic with Ash Grey. Then we're going to pick out a highlight on the trousers with Sky Grey. We're very much falling to the same way we've done the Super Commandos here as well. Now I'm just going to glaze a little bit of black just to knock back those highlights, because they can look a bit too light, so it just subtly takes them back down a tone. And to finish off, I'm just going to highlight the lightsaber with a little bit of white, and again, if you have made a few mistakes here and there on the red, just get some dirty red and just tidy up some of those raised areas. And Maul is finished. Last of all is a Sarge Ventress. Now we're starting off with a white undercoat, and the first thing I'm going to do is get some Drutchy Violet and apply that all over. Start off, just do a thinner coat, just add a bit of water to it, and then in some of the deeper recesses, certainly around her wrappings on her arms and her waist, you can add a second coat if you need to. Then after that, once it's dry, I'm going to do a light dry brush of white. This is more just to pick out those wrappings on her arms and also put a little bit of concentration around the back of her head on that cranium and around her cheeks and nose as well. I'm going to get some amethyst blue for the robes. I'm just going to do a couple of coats of this. I'm also going to pick out the boots as well as the top with this as well. Just take your time. Because it's over a white undercoat, you might want to do a couple of thin coats. Then I'm going to use some thin down frost art for the belt. It's kind of like got a weird like light bluey grey tone to it. Frost art was perfect, has been thinned down. Then any silver details, we'll pick those out with gunmetal. Then the design on the tabard, I'm going to use light earth for that. Again, just take your time, and if you're making mistakes, tidy back up with the previous colours. Then I'm going to apply some Nor all over the metals and the cloth. And then I'm just going to pick out a lightsaber with dirty red. With the lightsaber done, a Sarge Ventress is now ready to play games with. But stay tuned for some extra steps. Now the first thing I'm going to do here for those extra steps is just bring out that skin a bit more with some layers and some highlights of white. So I'm just going to get a little bit of thin down white and start picking out that cranium on the head, and also just emphasize like the knuckles, the extremities with a highlight of white as well. Now at this point, what I'm going to do is, because I've done some tidying up, I'm going to get some amethyst blue and I thin it down, and I use this for the markings, because if I make any mistakes, I've just tidied up with some white, I can just get a little bit of white in there and re-tidy back up, because it's the same kind of tone of white. It's not got a shade or too much of a shade getting in the way. Then I'm just going to get a few thin coats of Drutchy Violet for the skin, just in those deeper recesses, around the nose, cheeks, eyes, and also some on the wrappings as well, where it just needs a bit more definition. And now what I'm going to do is tie up those robes with a little bit of amethyst blue. Again, what we're going to do here is just punch out that purple a bit more, because the shade will have darkened it down a bit, so you get a bit more depth here and there, and it kind of acts as our first highlight or layer. And then what we're going to do, now they've got a very nice pattern on a Sarge Ventress's dress on the box art. That takes a lot of effort, so I'm going to find a quick way of doing that, and what I'm going to do is get a sponge, and I'm just going to start sponging that onto the dress. And for this I'm using lilac. Just going to take my time, just neatly and gently just dab it on like you would be chipping clones armor or the droids or whatever. Just take your time. Don't matter if you're making mistakes, you can always tidy back up with a little bit of amethyst blue if you need to. And also, once I've done the sponging, I'm just going to get a highlight of lilac here and there on some of those edges as well, just to add to the folds of the cloth. If some of those lilac tones are a bit too bright, what I'm going to do here is just glaze over with a bit of amethyst blue. Again, you're thinning it down to the consistency of a contrast and just layering, neatly layering. And what that will do is just knock it back a bit. And then you can always add some extra sponging for a bit more depth if you need to, using lilac. Take as long as you want, or just leave it as one coat. And there we are, a Sarge Ventress is now done and ready to play games with those extra steps. So I've now got the Republic and the Separatists done. All in all, I think the Republic guys were about 10 hours. The baddies, the Separatists, baddies, whichever you prefer, didn't take as long. So I'd say about 7 or 8 hours. In my head, I was like aiming for 24 hours here. So I've got loads of time to play with. But the scenery is not going to take that long at all. In fact, it's probably going to be the quickest part, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm going to do the old two-tone spray thing here. I'm going to spray it one colour, do a dust in another, but I'm very much under the time where I want to be for this, which is great. So as I said, I'm going to undercoat the scenery, and first of all I'm going to use some grey, so I'm going to coat over everything with grey on the buildings, and then once that's dry, you can do it while it's still wet if you want to. I'm just going to dust over it with Xandri dust, and what this is going to do is just give that two-tone effect. A lot of that grey, especially near the base of the buildings, it's going to stay there, but you get a lot of recesses, so you don't have to do that much work. For the gantries and crates, what I'm going to do here is spray those black and then dust over with some chrome silver after, and then very much leave them at that. I might add a shade or two, but that's it. Now you will have some metal details on the building, so what I'm going to do here is just heavily overbrush those with a little bit of gunmetal, so it's kind of like base coat. I'm not going to go mad. And then I'm just going to apply some Targor Raid Shade over to all the metal details, so some of the recesses, in some places you can coat all over, don't go mad. The largest gantry, I probably didn't go super mad, didn't go underneath it, just did it on the top. And don't forget to do the crates. So back to the buildings, we're now going to highlight them up with a dry brush. So I'm going to take my time, work my way through all the buildings, and I'm going to dry brush them up with light earth. In some places, if you've not dry brushed or wiped enough of the dry brush away, you get like the odd scuff. That's fine, because it looks a bit like weathering or a bit of chipping or a bit of damage, so don't worry too much. We can solve that later with a little bit of chipping as well. And like I said, if you have lots of areas where you've scuffled your dry brush, get some ash grey, and what we're going to now do is sponge that on like we did with the clone troopers, like we did with the droids. I'm going to pick out the consoles. I'm going to go for really straightforward consoles here. I could spend ages doing lots of different colours on the buttons. I'm going to pick them out with white, a couple of coats on the screens maybe, and then going to get some fluorescent green and then just apply that over. A couple of thin coats, and you just got like bright consoles and bright buttons. Really simple, really straightforward. To get all our models based, what we're going to start off first is pick out any stonework with ash grey. Doesn't matter if you undercoat them sandry dust or grey or white, everything's going to get a coat of ash grey. And then any area that's got a bit of dirt on it, I'm going to apply a little bit of muddy ground. Some of those areas that are just all flagstones, you can apply a little bit of muddy ground there as well if you wanted to, just so it looks like it's kicked on. Then I'm going to apply Targor Raid Shade all over, so that's over the flagstones and the dirt. And I'm going to dry brush lightly over everything with a little bit of light earth just to tie it all together. And then finish off with, I know, a grey rim. Not brown, not black, grey. I'm going to use ash grey for this because it looks nice. And that will help tie the entire box set together. And I think, all in all, quite quick and easy to do and looks nice. So the box set is finished. Honestly, I'm super pleased with the results. The good guys took a little bit longer, I think, than the Separatists. That might have just been like time, I don't know. It might have felt like it went on longer because it was the first set I did. But I'm super pleased with the results. The scenery was a breeze. That doing the two-tone undercoat just sped everything up so much. And it's great for just getting stuff on the tabletop. You could add more time as time goes on, like do some Arabesh markings on it or do some like other colours. It's entirely up to you. But for just getting stuff done in like less than 24 hours, it's a really quick and efficient way of getting your scenery done. Now, there are a few things I'd do differently if I was to do this again. For the video, I try to minimise the amount of paints I've got. I also don't want to overcomplicate things with lots of mixes, but in hindsight, what I probably should have done was done a mix with the greys for the Super Commandos and more, because I think I had a dark grey and a light grey, and I needed something in the middle just for the robes, just to feel a little bit more of a subtle transition. And I think that was like the biggest thing. I did a glazed and oxen back, but if I was to go back, I'd probably do a mix of like ash grey with sky grey and do a mid-tone for some of those things as well. That's just like a hindsight thing. Just wanted to minimise the colours and not overcomplicate it too much. But you live and learn when you've done stuff. That's the way of the world. I had a bit of a wobble because I thought at one point during this, I was like, oh, I'm not very good at painting, am I? But I've got to say, the models themselves lend really well to dry brushing and washing. And the fact that they've got the markings put on, sculpted in, has made it so much easier. You don't have to a certain degree, it could be a bit of a nightmare because you think, oh, hang on, I've now got to paint this marking. But actually, once you've got some paint on it, it's fine. It looks fine. So all that aside, is painting a non-Games Workshop box set harder than painting a Games Workshop box set? No, it's not. There's a few tactics you have to do different, a few other places you have to look. You can get away with making it up if you want to, but if you want to make it look like the shows, a little bit of research is involved, but not much, because the chore is watching some TV shows. Great, awesome. I really enjoyed this project. I hope there's lots of insightful things that you guys have found from watching it as well. And all in all, getting it all done in less than 24 hours was pretty sweet, so you could play games straight away over a weekend. Thank you to Asmodee UK for sending this set to us as well. So thank you very much, guys. Thank you, as always, to our patrons. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for your support. Without you, we wouldn't be able to do this. So super appreciate that. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoyed this. But remember, the Force will be with you.